Welcome to the Storypowers podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. My guest today is Matthew Pollard. Matthew has been called the real deal by Forbes, but is better known as the rapid growth guy. By the age of 30, he'd been responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar business success stories. He's the best-selling author of The Introvert's Edge, which was Amazon's 8th most sold book of the week, and Book Authority's 2nd best introvert book of all time. And he was chosen as one of the top 50 keynote speakers for 2019 by Top Sales World magazine. Matthew might also be the only Australian that actually knows what the yerba mate is, which is pretty impressive in its own right. All right, we've got lots to cover, so let's get to it. Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Pollard. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Mate, I'm ecstatic to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Your book, which is fantastic, by the way, took me back to my early sales days because, you described how you weren't really trained at all. And I started thinking that, the sales training I got when I got into financial sales was actually pretty strong. Looking at the list of things in your book about what salespeople need to do, you talked about establishing trust and agenda, asking probing questions, speaking to the right person, task closing, assuming the sale. And all of that worked pretty well, but not super well. And then as I started going through your list, I realized that my training might have lacked a couple of points from yours that are pretty important, which is very much the whole storytelling part of it. So the very first thing I wanted to ask you was, how did you learn storytelling, or how did you realize that that's something you needed to be doing? Because I'm not sure I 100% got that from how you described you learning to sell from the book.
Yeah, sure. So, when I first started to learn to sell, for those that are listening that haven't read my backstory, I was super introverted, had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, literally lost my job 3 weeks before Christmas. And I had no other jobs that I could get but commission-only sales jobs. So falling into a commission-only sales role and doing 5 days product training and not a single second of sales training, I got thrown on this road, and it was 93 doors before my first sale, which was horrible for anyone that was trying to sell. For an introvert, it was catastrophic. But for me, I went back and I made the decision that I was going to learn how to sell, but it had to be a system like anything else. And back then, I had a reading speed of a 6th grader. So, I had this thing called Erlen syndrome, which basically means I put on a pair of glasses and miraculously I can learn to read, not like everyone else, but start the process of reading. But that meant books like Brian Tracy and Zig Ziglar books, they're out of the question for me. It would have taken me a year to read them. So I fell on YouTube at the time, and YouTube was really becoming well known because, Australia had dial-up until, I was graduating high school. So, we just started having internet connection fast enough to really tap into the power of YouTube. And this was well before, videos like this podcast, that sort of thing. And I started to understand the value of a sales system. But what I found was that people would talk about storytelling, but when they talked about it, a lot of times they would say the importance of explaining and telling stories. So I was like, all right, well, I'll try storytelling out. And so I would go in and I would follow their instructions around, explain that you'd worked with someone in the past and that they wanted the same thing that they wanted and how they got them to an outcome. So, in my book, I give an example of one person I was trying to sell telecommunications to, and they were like, no, I don't want to go with your company because if I go with your company, last time I had really bad coverage and it's just not worth it. And, we had this new, guarantee because they increased the service and the coverage across the country. And I said, well, originally when you first started, I'm sure, why did you decide to do it? Well, it was going to save me money, but it's pointless if I can't make phone calls. Well, of course, I agree. However, I actually had a client very similar to yours, similar to you, that had, the same reason for joining, and then it was all bad coverage. But because we have this new service guarantee, they decided to give it a shot. And because of that, they then got such a positive outcome. And so while, originally you tried to save money and it didn't work, now you can have your cake and eat it too. That's the basic storytelling structure that a lot of people tell, right? So when you look at storytelling across the globe, the way people talk about it, it's so matter of fact, it's so business focused. But I'm an introvert. And introverts, by far, I mean, we're very empathetic people, right? We're great listeners. We're very empathetic. We feel a lot. And that's why we get stuck in our heads so much. And as an introvert, I mean, I'm like, these people are real, they're real people, right? They've got emotional stress. And especially a lot of times when you're speaking to a business owner, right, they're worried about whether or not they can feed their family next week. But when you're talking to a career professional, this person's excited about getting promoted. They're worried about losing their job. They're worried that a project is going to cost them weekends, and they promise their husband or wife that this is the last time that I'm ever going to give up my weekends. I'm not going to miss that kid's football game. There are other things going on. So what I noticed is that when you tell a story in business, because there's no emotional depth, people, yes, they listen. Yes, it works. Yes, it adds credibility, but people don't connect to it. And I started to research what people connected with in real storytelling. And I mean, people have been telling stories since the dawn of time. But that's why when we tell a story, and I'm not talking about stories like we do in business, I'm talking about the story of like how you met your husband or your wife, right? These stories, at the first time you tell them, they're a little bit bulky. They're a little bit, let's just say they're not as good as they could be. And then over time, if you're talking about it, you notice, oh, somebody really liked when I said this. I might embellish a little bit more. And then, oh, they really didn't enjoy this, so I might not say that next time. Soon it becomes a bit of a theatrical masterpiece, right? Like I say this, my wife says that, we hold each other's hand at some point, we look at each other and we say, so that's how we met. It's that whole emotional roller coaster. And I was like, well, how do we put that into a business forum? And then what I realized is that if I made the person in the story the hero, I talked about their emotional reasons for why they wanted to save money or their stress associated with the problem that they had, and then talked about the outcome and covered a very similar kind of structure, which we can go into in a minute, all of a sudden people would connect with them exactly the same way as you would a story about how you met your husband or wife. And I went, well, why is this working? And I started to research the science. And there's a study out of Princeton that talks about that when we deliver a story, what actually happens is it activates our reticular activating system, which causes our brains to synchronize. And I'm like, wow, this is impressive. Like for an introvert like me who can't foster natural rapport, I'm like, wow, this gives me a shortcut to fostering that rapport that introverts are great at building it into a deeper connection, which I can then do afterwards. But the story, it gives me that shortcut to making people go, wow, I like this person. I'm comfortable with him. And it's all neuroscience. Then I started to research that it short circuits the logical brain. You speak to the emotional brain. And I'm like, wow, okay, so that means that when I tell a story and in an emotional way, then all of a sudden the logical brain doesn't know how to process that. By the way, the logical part of the brain's going, that'll work for me, that won't work for me, I don't have time for this, hang up. The emotional part of the brain short circuits that and just goes story time, and it listens, and it changes everything, which means that when they listen, they're listening not for the details, but for the moral at the end. And if the moral of the story is this person wanted what you wanted, they were similar to you, not just with a business problem, but in a personal way as well, and they got to an amazing outcome, then they're going to see you as the only logical choice. And then, of course, there's that, that wonderful chestnut of the fact that people remember up to 22 times more information when it's embedded into story. So as I started to research all of the science behind it, what I realized is that a lot of people tell stories because it's what they're told to do as part of a greater sales process. However, the stories that they tell to be efficient with people's time or not to convolute the sales process, they truncate them. And the problem is that they're actually butchering them, where instead, if they tell a story in an elongated way, like they would the story of how they met their husband or their wife, and remove a lot of the other clutter. The jargon where you turn the fire hose of information on and the customer's like, oh my God, I can't, 30 years of experience in 10 seconds, can't take that on. All of a sudden, everything shifts and you can make much more. Well, you can shorten sales cycles. You can drastically increase closure rates. It's the story that is the center, or what I call the heart of the overall sales process.
I don't know if it's more surprising that you say you taught yourself selling and storytelling, you taught yourself this stuff, or that you actually managed to get real life value out of YouTube. I'm not too sure which one there is the most impressive. Or also that you either have or have met partners or husband and wife that will actually tell stories together as a group. Like every time I start with a story, my wife just goes, "Oh no, that one again."
I have stories that I use in business, and especially with COVID, working from home. My wife will say, "Oh gosh, I heard the Wendy story coming out of your office again." But this is the thing. Stories, they're predominantly for the teller, the receiver of the story, right? For them, and this is an important thing, especially for introverts when they're learning to sell. We're always stuck in our heads trying to work out what to say. So going in with a plan and having prepared stories, not to be someone that you're not, but to be the best version of yourself and to tell the best story that gets you the best outcome is hugely empowering, because you don't have to worry about what to say. You can gravitate to that story and you know that it works. So for me, there's been times where I've literally flown from Thailand back to the United States thinking I was still in my 20s, not my 30s, and getting back and not giving myself a day before I've got to be on, sales calls and things like that, because maybe it was a short notice presentation or something like that. And I've landed back, and it's so amazing that like I can start the sales process and I get to a story and I can literally switch my brain off. I can literally do it in my sleep, tell the story, and like I can switch my brain back on 3 or 4 minutes later and finish the story and say, does that make sense? And I know the customers go, wow, yeah, I need exactly what Wendy has. Or yes, I've got the exact same problem as Alex. And all of a sudden, I've got that connection with a customer that what I found is that you'd have to do so much more hustling to get to otherwise. And that would mean that you needed to learn those horrible bulldog techniques and hard closings that introverts especially don't feel comfortable with. So what I realized, and that's the reason why my book's been endorsed by Harvard, by Princeton, by Neil Patel, by Marshall Goldsmith, is my whole process is that, especially as an introvert, you want to find a process that doesn't have any of those bulldog hard closing techniques. It's just a natural step-by-step process that leads to a sale. And the easiest way to get to that is by telling a story.
I'm going to get us back to story very shortly, but I want to ask something about the system you describe in the book, because I immediately felt something when I was reading it, but then I couldn't quite put my finger on and explain, which was, you said something like that if you have a system, you don't ever need to take rejection personally. You just find what's not working in the system. Have I done all the steps? And if you haven't, tweak it and then go back at it. And that made complete sense to me. Made me start wondering if I am introverted, which I don't think I am. But I also, then later I thought, well, isn't this a very nice way to describe that age-old approach of it's a numbers game? And I don't think it is, but I couldn't quite put my finger in why your system of, just tweak the variables and then go at it again is different than the it's a numbers game approach that every salesperson gets taught.
So there are 3 questions in there. So let's tackle them one at a time. So firstly, whether you think you're an introvert or not. So the world's got way too confusing. So everybody says things like, oh, I'm now an ambivert, or I used to be introverted, but now I'm more extroverted, or, oh, I was extroverted, but COVID kind of made me feel more introverted. You either are or you're not. And the simple thing is that it's where you get your energy from. Let's declutter everything. If you get your energy from being by yourself or with 1 or 2 close friends, family members, then you're an introvert. If you get your energy from hanging out with other people, then you're an extrovert. It really is that simple. Now, sure, there are introverts that actually enjoy networking and sales now or for always, but that's because they've learned a system for achieving. I love networking now. I love selling, but I'm like a kid at Disneyland. I'll go and enjoy all the rides, but when I get home, I'm going to hit the pillow and I'm out cold because I'm exhausted. I'll speak from stage, and, Jim Cathcart's a good friend of mine. He spoke at a conference, Small Business Festival, which is the third largest conference in America for small business, according to Inc. And I founded it many years ago, and he came and was the closing speaker. Now, he and I were involved in that event for 3 days straight. At the end, I was exhausted. I wanted to go home, put on a hoodie, and just watch Netflix and do nothing else. He wanted to go and experience the live music capital of the world because he was charged up. I've never had to ask a 70-year-old before in my life if I can please go home at midnight because I was so tired, right? So if you're an introvert, it just means that you use your energy or your battery runs low when you're out with people and you need to go and charge out. But it doesn't mean a system or a process doesn't work for you. Now let's focus on the numbers game kind of concept. So the numbers game focus is just keep going to more doors. Now that is, I mean, there's that quote, the definition of insanity: doing the same thing over and over again and expecting better results, right, or different results. So for me, what I find is that a lot of people go into the world of sales, then what happens is one of two things: the fight or flight mechanism, right? So I'm either going to hustle through. Gosh, we love this hustle through idea in the world of entrepreneurship today, in today's world, right? We're just going to grind it out. Well, grinding it out with a better strategy makes it a lot easier. You have to grind a lot less. So a lot of people, of course, just take you up on the flight and they quit, right? They quit their businesses, they quit sales jobs, right? That's also not a choice. There's a middle ground. The middle ground is that, yes, eventually sales is going to be a numbers game. However, if you go in with the numbers game mentality and you just grind it out, some days you'll close, a sale in 93 doors, like my first day. Sometimes it'll be 107, sometimes it'll be 83, right? So my focus is the opposite. It's, okay, forget about the numbers game for a second. Let's learn a system. Let's go out and practice it. But by the way, the number of people that have reached out to me and said, look, Matt, your book transformed my life. And I'm, oh, great. So you're using the system? Oh, well, not, I haven't, fully prepared it yet. I'm like, okay, well, are you at least telling stories the way I tell them? Oh, not quite yet. I'm like, well, how exactly has it changed your life? Well, just knowing as an introvert that I can sell, is enough, is really exciting for me. And I'm like, well, okay, but you're still doing the numbers game mentality then. You now know you can sell, but you're not changing anything. You're just using that as a great belief system to push yourself to grind it out. So it means actually stopping, figuring out what your sales process is going to be, learning it, and then going out into the field, checking it, making sure that it works, and then changing one element at a time to make sure that, it doesn't blow up in your face. I mean, if you change multiple things, it's like a science experiment. You won't know what's going wrong. So once you have a solid structure and you spent time learning it, so you actually say those words without sounding scripted when you're out with people. By the way, most of your favorite characters in a movie, I need to tell you this, they're actually reading from scripts too. So if you think they sound natural, you can too. So once you've learned the process, written out what you want to say, practiced it so you sound organic, then you can go in and use it and perfect one thing at a time. Now, yes, it is still a numbers game. However, those numbers will continually get less and less, and which means you'll sell more and more often. A lot of people talk about creating their own luck. Well, I've always got this saying, everything always works out for me. Well, it does, because I put real effort around trying to get to the outcome that I want. So for those people that think, oh, I'll just grind it out every day, life's going to be pretty tough. For those people that want to think first, I would suggest create a system, understand it, and then go out and perfect it. Then yes, it will be a numbers game, but today it'll be 63 doors, tomorrow it'll be 48, the next day it'll be 19, the day after that it'll be 8, or the week after that it'll be 8. And then, eventually within the space of 6 weeks, I got it down from 93 doors to, on average, I'd make a sale every 3 doors. Now, here's the thing. It was still a numbers game for me. If I didn't go to 9 doors, I wouldn't make 3 sales. But it wasn't go to 93 times 3 to make 3 sales. It was go to 9 doors to make 3 sales. So yes, it's a numbers game. However, if you go in with that mentality that it's a system, 2 things happen. One is you then improve on those numbers so that the numbers come down dramatically. But the second one is it's an external process. So Henry Ford, people might know him. He built a few motor cars in his day.
I've heard of him. Yes.
Yeah. So when
I think he used to make cars that people used to like.
Yeah, exactly. There was back in the day, right? Back in the day when those cars were still popular. But back then, he wasn't the first person to introduce the production line, but he was the first person to introduce the production line to the world of manufacturing of motor vehicles. Now, the thing that I want people to realize is that when he first started, he didn't get many cars off that line. But he broke that production line into, I think it was 35 distinct elements, and he improved on each element every day to make sure that now, they pump out millions of cars still. And the reason for why they're able to do that is because of their system. you should see your sales system the exact same way. But when something went wrong, can you imagine Henry Ford go, oh my gosh, I was never meant to manufacture cars. There's no way he was going to do that. And you want sales to be the same way. It's an external process. So when something goes wrong, you say, okay, was it something wrong in the process? How do I fix that? When it happens once, you're like, oh, maybe it was a fluke. When it happens twice, you're like, okay, now we're starting to become significant. It's a statistically significant element. If it happens again and again, okay, now we need to really look at fixing this. But again, if you're a salesperson or a business owner selling and you've failed to close a deal, or you get rejected, how can you not take that personally? If it's just you saying whatever comes out of your mouth. If you're following a system, it's external. You just focus on how do I perfect it. Now, this isn't new stuff. I mean, Brian Tracy has been saying that the top 10% of all sales performers have a planned presentation, for a long, long time. The bottom 80% just say whatever comes out of their mouth. With stories, people go, oh yeah, I tell great stories. Sure you do. You just say whatever comes out of your mouth, whatever seems relevant. I say the same 3 stories every time. You don't need hundreds. 3 is all I need. And 3 is what most business owners need. So what I would suggest to you is that you need to have a planned presentation. By the way, the top 10% of all sales performers, they're not all extroverted. I know we all think that they are, but I'll tell you that Jeb Blunt, most people know him as a famous sales leader now. He's introverted. Oh, by the way, Zig Ziglar, that guy that did a few sales speeches back in the day, he's actually pretty introverted too. I interviewed his son, Tom Ziglar, on my podcast, The Introvert's Edge, and he talks about how his dad was very introverted. So a lot of times we project extroversion on these people that are successful. Perhaps you may even want to project extroversion on me because I'm happy to talk in a very open way about this topic. Firstly, find one topic matter expert that doesn't love sharing the value of what they do. An introvert's great when they're in their topic matter expertise. There's nothing that I'm sharing today that I haven't rehearsed, that I haven't structured, that I haven't scripted beforehand. I've just done 150 interviews like this. And because of that, I'm well rehearsed and I'm well practiced. So the thing that I would suggest to everyone is that you need to focus on that external system, because as soon as you do, if I get off this interview and I get told, gosh, you bombed out, nobody liked what you said, and I don't want to share this with my audience, I'll be like, well, what specifically didn't you like? And then I can tailor so that I don't have that happen again. If he says, oh, some of the things that I really liked was this, this, and this, I'm like, what exactly really rung true for you? Okay, well, maybe I'll focus more on that next time. If it's a system, you can improve. If it's off the cuff every time, then you're always going to be just that same level of bad or just that same level of okay. And neither of those are good enough for me, and they shouldn't be for you either.
I guess the misconception about introverts that I think many people make, and I've made this plenty of times, is I don't think most people think of it as an energy question as you described it. I think most people tend to think that the person who doesn't talk much, who's very quiet, who's shy, that's an introverted person. If you speak the way you and I are speaking just now, well, surely you cannot be introverted. I think that's the misconception. But you said something I want to jump on straight away. So you talked about the 3 stories, and I've heard you describe this before as 3 core stories. How do you choose them? What do the stories have to, what's the criteria for finding and knowing that these stories are your 3 stories?
Sure. So this actually requires a little bit more pre-work. And the reason why I suggest that is, a lot of people come to me for sales advice, and a lot of times their problem isn't sales. I mean, sure, they don't know how to sell or they need help selling, but they haven't done the marketing work beforehand to really identify who their client is. So when you're like, well, what are the stories? I said, well, what are the 3 major problems that your perfect client has? And they're like, well, they all have their client, they're all different. I'm like, no, they're not. And I was like, do you know who your ideal client is? Who's your ideal client? And they're like, oh, you mean like a customer segment? I was like, yeah, well, okay, well, let's start with your customer segment. We have, several of them. Yeah, but who's your primary? Oh, we haven't really found that out. Well, how do you know what the major problems are then, right? So you need to understand who your ideal client is. Secondly, you need to stop thinking of them as an avatar. Your ideal client you at least should know one name so that you can literally see them and go, okay, in my mind's eye, these are the problems that they have. Like for me, whenever I speak to somebody, I am speaking to one of the 3 people, but they're all very similar avatars. They're the introverted service provider business owners that want to make a great six-figure income doing what they love, right? And they're tired of that constant hamster wheel of struggling to find interested people, setting themselves apart and making that sale. But their biggest problem is that not that they can't sell. Sure, that's an issue that we have to address, but the biggest issue is that they struggle to get out of that commodity box as well. Price is a big issue, and they're tired of talking about it and having their customers feel that they are just worth the same as everyone else, and they're not understanding their value. I'll give you an example. I worked with a client, Wendy, which is the story that
the famous Wendy story, yes.
The famous Wendy story, right? Now, by the way, in my new book, The Introvert's Edge to Networking, I use the story of Whitney. Now, the reason I do that is in books, you can't tell the same story in every single book, right? So I then picked a different story and went with that. Like, I have hundreds, thousands of them. But the truth is, I've told the Wendy story thousands of times. So because of that, it's the one that I've rehearsed the most. So when people ask me about Whitney, I'm like, oh gosh, yeah, I got to remember that story now. I've got to practice that one, because I've only told that story a few hundred times, not a few thousand times. It's different, right? So the story of Wendy, the reason I tell it is it'll help you understand that you can do a lot of heavy lifting before you get to the sales approach. And also it'll show you how to select your stories the right way. So when Wendy first came to me, her biggest issue was that, she was charging $50 to $80 an hour for private consultation. She was a Mandarin teacher, right? So she taught, people how to communicate and write in Chinese. But when people came to her, she was charging $50 to $80 an hour for no problem for like a decade. And then all of a sudden, there were more people moving into California that were willing to charge $30 to $40 an hour to start their own Mandarin education businesses. Then she's dealing with the fact that there are people on Craigslist from China willing to charge $12 an hour, which a lot of people are being confronted with this global economy, especially in this world of COVID right now. And then she has these people that have created technologies in Silicon Valley. I'll teach you Mandarin, you teach me English, we won't charge anyone anything. So she's competing with free. So she comes to me, she's like, how do I compete in this crowded market? Can you give me sales training? And I'm like, Wendy, there is no fighting in this crowded market. Sure, I can teach you some sales techniques that will increase your closure rate, but eventually they're going to discover these technologies. They'll be talking to their friend. They're like, well, I'm just learning for free. Or they'll walk into someone that's offering it for $30 to $40 an hour. So let's get you out of that battle altogether first. Let's sidestep it. So I started to look at all the clients she worked with. And what I discovered is there were literally two people that she helped with more than just Mandarin education. These were executives being relocated to China. And she helped them understand, well, really three things. Firstly, the way that the Chinese develop rapport and how different it is. For instance, if I was trying to sell you something, if I was a really bad salesperson in the Western world, I might get to the end of a 45-minute meeting and say, so do you want to move forward? Yuck, right? But you might respond with, yes, no, or everyone's favorite, let me think about it. A week from now, if I reach back out to you and you still say you want to think about it, I know my chances of getting that sale are going down and down. Well, in China, they're going to want to talk about it 5 or 6 times. They're probably going to, before they even discuss business, by the way, they're probably going to want to see you drunk over karaoke once or twice, right? The reason for that, though, is that they're talking 50 to 100-year deals, not 12 or 24-month contracts. So it's about the character of the person that they're doing business with, because things change over that period. So she helped them understand that. She helped them understand the difference between e-commerce in China and the Western world, and the importance of respect. Like, learning the language isn't enough. You have to reduce your accent, how to handle a business card, and why it matters so much. And I'm like, Wendy, stop. You're doing so much more for these people than just language tuition. What are you doing? She's like, well, they're just a few things. I'm just trying to help. And I'm like, yes, but you're stuck in your functional skill. Is it fair to assume, as a result of the assistance that you're giving these people, they're going to be more successful when they get to China? And she's like, well, yeah, that's the point, right? I said, okay, so why don't we call you the China Success Coach then? Forget about Mandarin education. That could be an upsell. Let's focus on what I call the China Success Intensive, which worked out to be a 5-week program that worked with the executive, the spouse, and any children being relocated to China. Now, she loved the idea of this, but she's like, well, who do I sell it to? I said, well, who do you think your ideal client is? She's like, well, obviously it's the executive. I'm like, well, yeah, I was terrified moving from Australia to the United States, but imagine going to a place where people don't even speak the same language. I said, it's not your ideal client though. She's like, well, obviously the company would pay. And I'm like, yes, they have they have millions of dollars sometimes riding on the executive being successful. It's still not your ideal client. She's frustrated. She's like, well, who then? I said, your ideal client's the immigration attorney. She's like, what? I said, think about it. These people make $5,000 to $7,000 for doing all the bureaucracy, all the paperwork to organize a visa. after the cost of getting a client, which isn't cheap, the rent, the paying for all the people to handle that bureaucracy, they'd be lucky to make $3,000. I said, just offer them $3,000 for a successful introduction. They were like, the immigration attorneys loved it. They were like, $3,000 for a simple introduction? What do I have to say? And she said, well, it's easy. You've just got to say, congratulations, you've now got your visa. I just want to double check you're as ready as possible to be relocated across to China. And people respond with, yeah, no, I think we're good. We got our place sorted. We've got our visa now. Thank you. We're learning the language. Kids are getting pretty good at it too. I think we're set, overconfident executive. And they just respond with, there's a lot more to it than that. I think you need to speak to the China success coach. Wendy would then get on the phone with the easiest sale in the world. I mean, these people were terrified to go. The organization was motivated to pay, and their attorney recommended them. She charged $30,000 for this. After a $3,000 commission, she made $27,000 for the easiest sale in the world, instead of struggling every day to make $50 to $80 an hour. Now, here's the key. What she did, or what we did together, is to say, so what are the things you do outside the scope of your functional skill? For Wendy, it was e-commerce, it was respect, and it was helping them understand the difference between rapport in China and rapport in the Western world. And then I said, what's the higher level benefit of that? For her, that was China success. For me, I'm a branding expert, I'm a social media strategist, I'm a sales systemization expert, I'm a master in business coach, whatever. There's too many things. Nobody cares really, do they? No one cares how hard it was for me to learn, how long it took me to learn. However, when I say I'm the rapid growth guy, that allows me to get heard in a crowded marketplace. So that's element one. Then you have to say, well, what unmet need in the marketplace can I serve? For Wendy, it was executives being relocated to China. For me, I work with introverted service provider businesses. That message and that strong niche allows me to get people from all over the world to see me as the only logical choice. And that makes sales so much easier. But then when you get to the process of picking your stories, you just say, well, what are the three major problems within my niche marketplace? Now, I understand that a lot of people are scared of niching because, they're like, oh, well, if I niche, there might only be 2 or 3 customers in my city. We live in this global marketplace now where there's 2 to 3 clients in your city. It means there's thousands of clients, millions of clients all over the world, right? So these days, speaking to everyone firstly is speaking to no one. But these days, you can use technology, psychology, and strategy to get your ideal clients to chase you by knowing your message, by knowing your niche, and by having those strong stories. So what I suggest is work out what your niche market is. Who is that client avatar? Give that person a name, and then say, what are the 3 major problems that they have that my product or service helps them to overcome or to achieve? And then once you do that, then working out what writing those stories becomes easy because you know who you're writing it to, what emotions they're going through, whether they're, worried about going broke, whether they're worried about losing their job. All of that becomes so much simpler. Then you can use a very simple storytelling matrix of, a way of explaining a story in the right way, in a way that they're like, oh my gosh, this person knows me better than I know myself. How do I not work with this person? But until you do that, you've got a story that's hit or miss. And you think you need hundreds of stories, when in truth, you really don't need many at all.
I guess my question with that is, I'm very familiar with the Wendy story because I've read the book and I've heard you in a few podcasts, and that one I think is the most popular of the other ones. And so and I had a look through some of the material you put out on unified messaging and things of that nature. So my major question here is this. Most of the stuff you're talking about requires the person going through this process look through the clients you serve, look through the products the problems you solve, look through the clients you've had in the past, so you find the stories. Now, how does someone do that if they're just starting? Because they won't have that experience to draw on.
Absolutely. So firstly, if you're just starting, usually one of 2 things take place. So you're either working for an organization, or you're finally going into business for yourself. So if you're working for an organization, remember that you don't need to have your own stories. The whole point of working for an organization is to say, we worked with this person. So go and interview the best salesperson. Go and interview, funnily enough, I work with billion-dollar tech companies, and the marketing team go, we only think in segments. Where do you get all these real stories from? And I'm like, the sales department is over there. How do you not know this? Like the person that implemented the service is over there. There are companies, and I can't mention the names due to confidentiality agreements, but literally billion-dollar tech companies that I have to interrogate. I put 7 people in the room, from their development group to their marketing people, to their sales people, to the people that actually did the rollout. And I'll interrogate them for 45 minutes just to get the information that I need to be able to then tell a 45-second story. Right. So be willing to ask questions and, find out one customer that was really hard to get from the salesperson, then go and speak to the person that actually delivered the service to find out the outcome. And then when you can then create this story and then say to somebody when you meet them, I perfectly understand. The last thing I want to do is waste any of your time. However, when they give you an objection, we actually had a customer very similar to you. And when we first met them, your organization, right? So when we first worked with them, the customer won't tell the difference. And the truth is, they're not buying you, right? Of course, they're going to buy because of the relationship they foster with you. However, they're buying the company that you work for. You represent them. So exchanging I for we, nobody's going to care. Now, when you go and start your own business, a lot of the times that didn't just come out of nothing, right? You were probably a copywriter working for a big organization, and now you're a copywriter working for yourself. Now, remember that the customers that you served were your customers, right? You just served them on behalf of a bigger organization. Now, so if you said, when I first met John, he had a problem, or when I first started to work with John, this is the struggles they had. How is that not true? You still worked with them, didn't you? You just worked with them while you were representing this company. But how does that lessen anything that you did for them? Now, if there was a whole team involved in that, you still did your little part, and that little part had an outcome. So again, you can still build out the story. A lot of people overcomplicate it. And in truth, if you really, really are starting fresh, and I mean, if you started a business and you've never even worked with somebody else doing that, right, then go and deliver it for 3 people for free that are in your ideal customer avatar, or go and do it for low cost just to get your first case studies, your first success stories, right? Truth is, if you become great at sales, you probably don't need to discount. You can probably sell it just as well without stories. You'll just have to, go through a little bit more of a numbers game to get your first few clients, those people that will trust you, that feel connected. Use your personal story for why you actually started the business instead. And then once you get your first couple of clients, then make sure you over deliver on your promises. So you've got these walking testimonials that tell everybody, which will get you more clients, but also you can then curate your best stories to share with everybody that you speak to.
So one point I want to kind of focus a bit more on, just because I think this is so important. And this is something, a lot of people do this wrong. If you see the way a lot of people describe themselves or their businesses, the focus is always on what we do and not what you get out of it or what the customer gets out of it. And I think that I think what you call this is the high level benefit, right? Can you just talk a bit more about why people need to switch between, I'm an expert at this, or this is the product I deliver, the service I deliver, to this outcome, this high level benefit outcome?
Absolutely. So I think the thing that you need to realize is, in all cases in business, it's not about you. The number one rule of business, or number one rule of networking, or number one rule of sales, I would always recommend, it's not about you. It's about the people that you serve. So if you say, I'm an expert in A, B, C, D, like, you're expecting the customer to go, and that is relevant to me because, and they need to work it out. Now, they should be able to see it as according to you, right? Because you've got 30 years of experience. So you know exactly how you help these people. But the truth is that you're asking them to look at what you do and go, this is how it can help, right? But it's not about you. It's about how you can serve them. Now, everybody has unique experience, unique upbringing, unique elements of themselves that perfectly qualify them to help a demographic of people. So if you say this demographic of people, i.e., I provide rapid growth or help introverted service provider business owners obtain rapid growth in a business that they doing what they love, right? All of a sudden, it's all about them. Now, I could also say I have a huge amount of sales experience teaching introverts how to sell successfully. I understand marketing, and one might say, because I built 5 multi-million-dollar businesses from the ground up, I'm kind of a marketing expert. I'm also a master in neuro-linguistic programming. So all of these things perfectly qualify me to do rapid growth anyway. So instead of giving them my resume, I could just say, I help introverted service providers obtain rapid growth. It becomes so much simpler. So what I would suggest is the same thing applies to when you're telling stories. Like, when you're telling stories to people, so often people will share in their story how they were able to do this for the customer, how they were able, they're the hero of the story. No one wants to hear that. It just sounds like you're bragging on yourself. So what I suggest that you do instead is take a step back and say, how do I make the person in the story the hero? We were talking about the big technology company that I worked with a while back, and I had to interrogate them for 45 minutes. And they told this story, eventually we got this story about how we moved this group of people into, this company into the cloud. And I said, what was the name of the person? You keep referring to them as the CTO. Well, okay, the guy's name was David. Well, I can't understand why I care about the CTO. How do I feel connected with CTO? But when it comes to the physical person, David, I can feel his pain. I can feel him worried about everything. I said, also, you didn't really tell me about why that person moved into the cloud. You said to me that you've been chasing them for years, but why all of a sudden did they decide to move to the cloud? Well, they didn't know. See, a lot of times we only think about how amazing we are and the things that we were able to achieve and the things that we were able to do. And because we think about ourselves, we don't really think about our clients, which means our stories are only one-dimensional. So I said, well, go and find out why they moved to the cloud. So they went out and they asked them questions. Here's the fun thing. They discovered that client they'd been chasing them for years. It was a government organization, and their server had crashed just before Christmas. They couldn't run payroll. Now, can you imagine being the CTO of an organization? Can you imagine being David, not being responsible for why nobody got paid over Christmas, biggest spending season of the year? Worse than that, he had to get his entire team to work through Christmas so that they could run payroll. They could get everything fixed so they could run payroll before New Year's Eve. So he ruined Christmas specifically for his entire team. So based on that, he was the guy that ruined Christmas, and he was determined never to let that happen again. Isn't that a lot more exciting as an element of a story? Again, it's about them. Now, here's the interesting thing. He was worried about getting fired, of course, right through Christmas, but it turns out that he actually got promoted afterwards because of how well he handled it and how well he navigated everything to the cloud so it would never happen again. Right. So those elements of the story, gosh, they add so much more value. When I talked about, which we need to make sure we fit into this interview, the elements of what a good story is. I did a session with a group of people in a personal training, a gym franchise with personal trainers. And they told me this story about how this person was about to cancel their gym membership. So they set them up a personal training regiment, and then they, got to an amazing outcome. And I said, okay, but why did they join the gym in the first place? Turns out the girl was trying to get pregnant. She couldn't get pregnant because she was, the doctor said that her weight was an issue, so she had to lose weight. So she joined the gym to do that, to lose weight, but then she wasn't losing weight, so she was canceling her gym membership. Imagine how she felt. I mean, poor girl probably felt like she was letting her husband down, letting her family down, and when she got to the end, I was like, okay, well, you gave her a personal training regimen. And then she stayed. She's like, yeah, she stayed. I was like, did she get pregnant? She's like, yeah. I said, how were her parents about that? Were they excited about the fact they got to be grandparents? All these things missing from the story. Why? Because it was a story about how I saved somebody from canceling, how I gave them a personal development training plan, and how I was able to save that person from canceling, as opposed to this young lady who was trying to get pregnant, but she had too much weight. And as a result of the personal training regimen, we were able to she was able to get pregnant, how amazing she felt about being able to be that conduit that got her to the outcome that was so positive for her and her family. And you should just see the eyes of the family, because, they now bring their, kid to the nursery at the gym because, whatever the story is. But you see what I mean? You can make a story all about someone else, be all about someone else.
There's a couple of things there you said that are great. And it's just something I hammer on whenever I'm teaching people how to use stories better, which first of all is details. Like, you need specific details. And for some reason, people think that if you make it specific, then it becomes less relatable, when it's the opposite. The more specific it is, the more universal it becomes. But also, I think on the story you just told about the woman wanting to get pregnant, is if that part is not there, is just someone going to the gym to maybe look a bit better. yes, I relate to that. It's upsetting if you can't look a bit better when you want to, but the pain is nowhere near as big as, I want to have a child and I can't. And that's something I come across a lot, where someone is telling a story and I said, okay, so you wanted to run a marathon and you didn't think you might finish, and the problem with that was, oh, it would just be a bit annoying if I didn't finish. Yeah, but I don't care. Give me something more. Otherwise, it's just, we're not emotionally involved with it. All right, so you talked about the unified messaging with that high level benefit. We talked earlier about the sales system that uses stories. Are those the two main ingredients for rapid growth, or is there anything else completely missing from that picture still?
No, so the main things that you need, I talk about rapid growth being 3 steps. If you have a unified message that excites and inspires people to want to know more, you have a niche that you've identified that would be your willing and excited to buy clients, then sales is really the third step. Now, the thing that I find is most people will gravitate to sales because that's their the most emerging problem right now. But the problem is that means they still have to do a lot of heavy lifting. So the sales process has to be so much better. At the National Freelance Conference, because people think the marketing takes so long. So I did this at the National Freelance Conference. Nearly 200 people in the room. I pulled out a 5-step template that I use to help people craft their unified message and discover their niche of willing to buy clients. And at the end of that session, I said, put your hand up if you now have identified your niche and you've got a message that will excite them to want to know more. Like 97% of the room put their hands up. I said, keep your hands up, though, if this is the most time you've ever spent on marketing. Because it sounds great, 97% of the room. 45 minutes the session was, 85% of the room kept their hands up. So the key is that this stuff absolutely works if you do it, and then you can jump straight into sales. But now you know your niche, you know what the problems they are, so you can then build out your stories the right way. Now, one of the things that I would suggest, you don't need to hire me to get your unified message and discover your niche. There's a 5-step template that I've created that I used at that National Freelance Conference that you can download at matthewpollard.com/growth. If you just go there, you'll be able to download the template. I'd suggest that you spend about 2 hours on it, but you do about an hour with you and an hour with a buddy. So buddy up with someone that's not from your industry. So if you're in technology, go and buddy up with someone in medicine, or even better, go and meet up with a personal trainer that's not in such a highly complex sales. So you don't fall into each other's jargon, right? The goal for me is that if you spend 45 minutes on this exercise to an hour on each person and have somebody else to get you out of your jargon junk, if you like, then you really will be able to get that message right and discover the niche. Then, you'll be able to, focus on your sales system and drastically improve your performance. And again, the link is matthewpollard.com/growth to access that free template.
I'll put that on the show notes. And I'm very mindful of your time now. And I just wanted to mention how one other thing I like about your book, that I liked this at the very last third of the book, was how it made me feel like a complete idiot. Because, I like to think I'm a good writer and I'm pretentious about my writing. And then I thought, well, why does he have a co-author? Well, what is this co-author nonsense? And as a speaker, surely he can write. And then I think only at the very last third of the book, you reveal that why you have a co-author, because how long it takes you to write normally. And then you have the co-author do a whole chapter or two, which is very good as well. And I really like that. I had it at the back of my mind. I was like, but I still don't like this co-author thing. Is he a good storyteller? Is the co-author a good storyteller? So yeah, I really like that. And I've been recommending the book to quite a lot of people that are not introverts. I just think that the system, the sales system plus the stories is an approach that I hadn't come across. I've read plenty of sales books and I've read plenty of storytelling books, but that yours, I think, is the only one that I found that matches that. Now I have to let you go, but can you just tell us quickly, where can people find more about you?
Absolutely. So, and we did touch on the storytelling process today, but there's a ton of free videos where I explain it in much more detail that you can find on YouTube. You can find me on LinkedIn, obviously, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever your preferred medium is, of course. You can also, I would suggest, check out theintrovertsedge.com. There you'll be able to download the first chapter. My publisher hates me when I say this, but you don't need to buy my book. Just go to theintrovertsedge.com. You'll be able to download the first chapter. And when you do that, you'll find that it'll firstly get you over your hurdles around the sales process. And then it'll also map out the 7-step process. If you do nothing more than look at what you currently say, you'll be able to fit it into those 7 steps. You'll realize some things are out of order, some things don't fit. Stop saying those things to customers. There's a reason why it doesn't fit. And then you'll realize that there's some gaps. And if you fill in those gaps, you'll easily be able to double your sales in the next 60 days. Now, for those people, because I know that there's probably going to be a bunch of people here that prefer to read in Spanish rather than English. And my book has now been translated into Spanish as well. As a matter of fact, it's currently a bestseller on Audible as well in the Spanish language. So feel free, if you go to the introvertsedge.com, you'll be able to click on translations and you'll be able to see the Spanish version there. And when you click on that, you'll be able to download the first chapter of that book for free as well.
Amazing. Matthew, thank you very much for your time today. This has been fantastic.
My absolute pleasure, mate. Thanks for having me on.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves. And until next time. I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, I'd love for you to subscribe and leave us a review or a rating on the Apple Podcasts app. It's very easy. You open the app and find this show. Then scroll down a little, and when you see the stars, tap. I'd really appreciate it, and it does help other people find us. And if you'd like to get in touch or find out more about what I do, reach out to me on LinkedIn or visit my website, storypowers.com.